My name is Elena Mercer, and I was 39 when I finally told my parents the truth that shattered the version of our family they had spent 20 years protecting. My mother dropped her coffee. My father went silent. My younger sister Claire stared at me as if she already knew what I was about to reveal. Then my mother whispered, "You would destroy this family just to prove you were right." I didn't answer. Instead, I placed a small blue box on the kitchen table and rested my hand on its lid. Inside was an old phone containing a recording they had never heard. That recording would eventually explain Claire's missing suitcase, my father's secret financial transfers, and the reason my mother had spent years convincing everyone that I was unstable. But at that moment, I still didn't know how dangerous the truth would become. For most of my life, I had been the difficult daughter. If Claire cried, someone asked who had hurt her. If I cried, someone asked what I had done wrong. I learned to question myself before questioning anyone else. That habit followed me into adulthood. I became a school counselor because I understood what frightened people looked like when they insisted they were fine. I was observant, perhaps too observant for my family. My father, Richard, was an accountant. My mother, Diane, managed a clothing store. Claire was 6 years younger and effortlessly became the daughter everyone described as easy. I loved her enough to ignore the difference for years. Then our grandmother, Evelyn, changed something. 18 months before she died, she gave me the blue box containing an old silver key, 2 photographs, and a handwritten note. "Keep this until you stop doubting yourself." I laughed and asked what the key opened. She only smiled and said, "Not a door." I should have asked what she meant. I didn't. That mistake would haunt me later. Months afterward, Claire appeared outside my bedroom carrying a black suitcase. She looked over her shoulder before whispering, "Can I leave this here?" I asked why. Her voice trembled. "Because if he finds it, he'll know I'm thinking about leaving." I let her bring it inside. Then I asked the question that changed everything. "Claire, are you safe?" She nodded too quickly, and that was when I realized my family had been hiding something bigger than an argument. The next morning, my father called me into the living room before I had even finished my coffee. My mother sat beside him, perfectly composed, while Marcus, Claire's husband, stood near the window with his arms folded. Claire was nowhere in sight. My father's first words were calm enough to sound rehearsed. "Your sister needed some time away." I stared at him. "Where did she go?" He avoided the question. "You don't need to worry about it." That answer made my stomach tighten. Why was everyone suddenly protecting information from me? And why did Marcus look almost satisfied? My mother reached for my hand. "Elena, sometimes loving someone means knowing when to step back." I pulled away. "Sometimes loving someone means noticing when they're afraid." Nobody responded. That silence followed me upstairs. When I opened my bedroom door, the black suitcase Claire had left there was gone. So was the blue box. I searched the closet, under the bed, inside my car, everywhere I could think of. Nothing. Then, at 11:47 that night, my phone vibrated. An unknown number had sent a message. "Don't trust the person who tells you." Claire left willingly. Before I could reply, another message appeared. "Your grandmother knew." My hands went cold. Who had this number? How did they know about my grandmother? And most frighteningly, what did they mean by knew? I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. I barely slept. At sunrise, I drove to my grandmother's old house. My parents had sold it months earlier, but I still had a key. Dust covered the rooms, yet I remembered her writing desk immediately. Then I remembered the silver key from the blue box. My fingers shook as I found a narrow drawer with a tiny brass lock. The key fit. Inside was a folder and another handwritten note. "Elena, if they ever convince you that your memory is the problem, read everything before you believe them." Underneath were bank statements, emails, and printed messages. One account immediately caught my attention. It belonged to Claire. Money had been transferred from it repeatedly, but Claire had never mentioned those withdrawals. Then I saw an email between my mother and Marcus. "Once Elena is discredited, Claire will have nowhere else to go." I read that sentence twice. Suddenly, being called difficult didn't feel like an insult anymore. It felt like preparation for something from the beginning. I read the email again, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the words stayed exactly the same. "Once Elena is discredited, Claire will have nowhere else to go." For 20 years, I had believed my family simply thought I was difficult. Now, I wondered whether they had been deliberately building that reputation because they knew I would eventually discover something. My hands were still shaking when I noticed a small memory card taped beneath the folder. I almost left it there. Instead, I took it home, found an adapter, and opened the files on my laptop. There were dozens of recordings, each marked with a date. Most were ordinary conversations, but one file made my breathing stop. My mother's voice came through the speakers. She always makes herself the victim. Then Marcus answered, "That's useful. People already expect Elena to overreact." My father's voice followed. "What about Claire?" Marcus paused before saying, "She'll come around." I stopped the recording. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. If they had planned to discredit me, what exactly were they trying to hide? And where was Claire? I called a lawyer named Naomi Patel, someone a colleague had recommended. She listened carefully while I explained everything. When I finished, she didn't ask whether I was sure. She asked one question. "Where is your sister?" I admitted I didn't know. Naomi's expression changed. "Then that's your first priority." 2 days later, Claire finally called. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm at a motel." I asked if she was safe. "Yes," she answered too quickly. I knew that kind of answer. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "Not here." Then she went silent. "Claire, what's wrong?" She whispered. "Mom found me." My heart dropped. My mother had apparently arrived carrying documents and insisting Claire needed to sign them. I told Claire not to sign anything. She promised she hadn't. Then, she said something that changed the entire situation. "Elena, I took pictures." Seconds later, photographs appeared on my phone. They showed documents transferring control of Claire's inheritance to Marcus. My parents had never told Claire that our grandmother had left her a protected trust. Marcus knew. My father knew. And suddenly the missing suitcase made sense. Claire hadn't been preparing to run away from a marriage. She had been preparing to escape people who wanted control over her future. Naomi immediately contacted the trustee and requested an emergency review. The next morning, my father called me. His first words weren't denial. They were a warning. "You have no idea what you're doing." For the first time, I realized he was afraid. My father's warning stayed in my head for days because it sounded less like concern and more like fear. Naomi told me not to confront him again. Instead, she began organizing everything. The bank records, emails, messages, Claire's photographs, and the recordings from my grandmother's phone. But evidence only matters when it can be verified, and that became our next challenge. My parents insisted the recordings were manipulated. Marcus claimed Claire had misunderstood the documents. My mother told relatives that I was having another episode and becoming obsessed with destroying the family. For a moment, I wondered whether they could actually make everyone believe them. Then Naomi found something they couldn't explain. The original phone still contained the recordings, complete with dates and metadata. The financial transfers matched the dates discussed in the recordings. The messages came from verified accounts. The photographs Claire had taken matched the original legal documents. Every piece connected to another. And then came the hearing. My parents arrived together. Marcus followed them, wearing the same calm expression he had used at family dinners. Claire entered separately, carrying the black suitcase. Seeing it beside her, Chair brought back the night. She had whispered that she was afraid someone would find it. The judge asked Claire whether she wanted to speak before the evidence was reviewed. She looked at me. I wanted to tell her what to say, but I remembered something important. This was her life, not mine. So I stayed silent. Claire faced the judge. "I used to think leaving made me selfish," she said. "Then I realized staying somewhere I was afraid wasn't loyalty." Marcus shifted in his seat. Naomi presented the financial records first. The transfers showed money leaving Claire's trust without her permission. Then came the emails between my mother and Marcus. Finally, Naomi played the recording. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. "She always makes herself the victim." Marcus answered, "That's useful. People already expect Elena to overreact." My father's voice followed. "What about Claire?" Silence. Then Marcus said, "She'll come around." My mother lowered her head. The judge asked whether the recording could be authenticated. It could. Then came the question I had feared most. Why had I waited so long? I looked at the judge and told the truth. Because for 20 years, they taught me to doubt myself. The room became completely silent. And then Claire reached for my hand. The judge reviewed the evidence one final time before making the decision. The proposed transfer of Claire's inheritance was blocked, and an independent review of the trust was ordered. Marcus was removed from any authority over the account, and the financial records were referred for further investigation. Nothing dramatic happened after that. There was no shouting, no police rushing through the courtroom, no movie-like confession. Just paperwork, consequences, and a truth that could no longer be dismissed as my imagination. My parents remained seated after everyone else began leaving. My mother approached me in the hallway. Her eyes were red. "You ruined everything," she whispered. For most of my life, those words would have crushed me. This time I simply looked at her. "No," I said. I stopped pretending everything was fine. She started crying. But I didn't reach for her. That was harder than confronting her. I'd spent years believing that keeping peace meant absorbing everyone else's pain. Now I understood that boundaries weren't cruelty. Sometimes they were the only way to stop a cycle. Marcus disappeared from our lives soon afterward. Claire moved into her own apartment, where she chose everything herself. One afternoon, she showed me a bright red kettle sitting on her kitchen counter. She laughed when I asked about it. "Marcus hated bright colors," I smiled. "Then I think you picked the right color." For the first time, Claire looked completely relaxed. Months passed. My relationship with my parents remained distant. They never gave me the apology I had imagined for years. Surprisingly, I stopped waiting for it. One evening, I opened the small blue box again. The silver key was still there, along with my grandmother's note. "Keep this until you stop doubting yourself." I finally understood her message. The key had never been meant to open a door. It represented a choice. Trust what I saw, even when everyone around me insisted I was wrong. I placed the key beside my front door. Then I noticed the black suitcase Claire had once hidden in my bedroom. At the beginning, it had represented fear and escape. Now it represented something completely different. Claire no longer needed to disappear. She had her own home, her own money, her own decisions, and her own keys. As for me, I finally stopped apologizing for noticing what others wanted hidden. My family had called me difficult because I refused to make myself smaller. Maybe I wasn't easy. But I was finally free. Sometimes the person everyone calls difficult is simply the first person brave enough to stop pretending. If this story meant something to you, subscribe for more stories about family betrayal, hidden secrets, boundaries, and truth finally coming to light.